Good morning guys, welcome to my unboxing and review of the Master Grade Gundam Amazing Red Warrior. This is a 2015 standard release that I got for $62, which seems about right for what you get in this box because of the Amazing Red Warrior's gimmick being its incredibly varied arsenal, with a couple of very large weapons that you can kind of reconfigure and change to like kind of split into its constituent parts for a number of different weapons, or to reconfigure them to make a number of large weapons, as well as of course the rather large hyper bazooka mounted on the backpack on the right arm. So Build Fighters is a little bit weird. In the high grade line, we've received so many Build Fighters kits. Like, I'm pretty sure it's at least around 100 now if you include the P Bandai variants. But in the Master Grade line, for standard releases, we only got like 5, as far as I'm aware. We got the Build Strike full package, we got this kit, the Amazing Red Warrior, we got the Sengoku Astray, which I've already taken a look at on this channel, we got the Build Gundam Mark II, which has been out of print for a very long time and I've been looking for it, I just haven't been able to find it, and then we got the Wing Fenris Renacita, or whatever it's called. So as far as the Build Fighters line goes, it is pretty sparse in the Master Grade line for standard releases. I know P Bandai had stuff like the Polypod Ball and the Stormbringer, but getting into the Amazing Red Warrior here, so like most Build Fighters kits, they do have a base kit they're going to be based on. The Amazing Red Warrior in universe is based on the Perfect Gundam III, the Red Warrior, and unlike most of the other Build Fighters kits, we never gotten a Perfect Gundam III kit, and this kit actually doubles as the Perfect Gundam III. I think if you reconfigure the backpack a little bit, you can basically get the Perfect Gundam III, but as for the base kit in our world that the Amazing Red Warrior is based on, it is going to be the venerable Master Grade ARC 78-2 2.0 frame. So I've taken a look at a number of kits that have used that frame on this channel, and most of them are fairly solid. The frame is, while dated, it does the job fine for not super over-the-top designs, and apart from the backpack, the Amazing Red Warrior is not that over-the-top, so I think it should do the job fine here. So of course, with this really nice box art here of the Amazing Red Warrior emerging, kind of, I guess, like parting the clouds in this really cool kind of box art here. And on the bottom, we get the painted build, of course, showing off all the different gimmicks of the kit, the posing of it, and stuff like that. Of course, you get your pilot figure there of Meijin Kawaguchi. You get an image showing off the decals on the kit, and then, of course, you get the main gimmick of the kit being all of the weapons that it has. It has several 3-tube missile launchers in the chest and in the skirts. It has a wrist-mounted beam saber, a kind of very small short version of the beam Tonfa that you would have seen on the Unicorn Gundam. And then of course you have all of the weapons here. You have the Hyper Bazooka on the right, and then the weapon on the left you can swap out between either the gun blade for a more balanced loadout here, so it has a decent melee option, or you can have it as either the beam Gatling, I think, or the long beam rifle for a fully like ranged setup, very Buster Gundam-like in that aspect. And then on the back here, of course, showing off a lot of its weapons, of course, with the handgun there split off from the gunblade, I think. I don't remember exactly what combines into what, but of course you have the gunblade long type there, the gunblade short type there, the beam rifle, it's either Ko or Otsu, I don't remember which. And then of course talking about combining everything into like the beam Gatling and things like that. And then down here you have like, I think the long beam rifle here. So yeah, just a ton of different gimmicks across this kit. Talking about optionally, you have a ton of different ways to display all of the weapons across this kit, which is pretty interesting, and you'll definitely be seeing that later in the posing section. So getting right into it, inside the box, we will get 8 bags of runners, which seems fairly typical for a slightly more, I guess, involved Master Grade that has some more stuff in it. And of course, we will be getting this standard Master Grade style manual here with a cropped version of the box art of the Amazing Red Warrior. On the back, we will get a large full spread painted build of the Amazing Red Warrior, looking pretty cool there. While I think the color scheme is a little bit monochrome, I do dig many of the parts across this kit. I like the modified chest armor, and I like the V-fin, very like kind of thin and vertical, very Astray-like in that regard. On the inside here, you get information on the, not really development, I guess creation of the Amazing Red Warrior as a gunpla in Build Fighters. Of course, some information on either the plot of Build Fighters or some information on Meijin Kawaguchi, the pilot of this kit. And then you get some information on the Perfect Gundam, which is actually getting reprinted next year. I might take a look at that because I think it's a wacky, interesting design that people haven't really talked about for a while. So that might be something I'm interested in taking a look at. Make sure to submit notification bell so you don't miss that if I decide to upload that. And of course, you get information on the full armor Gundam here, the blue recolor of which I have taken a look at on this channel way back in like March. And then of course you will be getting your parts list here. In very typical Build Fighters fashion, there are going to be a number of parts on the frame runners from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 that we are not going to be using. It looks like we're only going to be using half of the beam saber effect parts here, presumably because this kit only has one beam saber mounted on one of the wrists. So of course we get into our body unit here, building up the chest. Now this frame part here does look like it's going to be new for the Amazing Red Warrior and not from the Arc 72 2.0, presumably to accommodate the vent opening gimmicks for displaying the missile pods there. So of course you do that for both sides, put in your pilot, Major Kawaguchi, and then you get into this part here, which is from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 for the frame parts for the joints, for the shoulders, and then you get into those shoulder joints and things like that, put in a polycap for the backpack, and then you assemble the lower part, and then layer all of your armor on, which should end up looking quite nice if that painted build was anything to go by. Then you get into your head, which is very typical Master Grade fare. It looks very similar to the Arc 72 2.0 build, so not really much to comment on there. In the arms, yep, that frame is in fact the Arc 72 2.0, which should have some very nice like armor sliding gimmicks and things like that that look really nice as you articulate the kit. So yeah, the construction is pretty much identical to the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, with the exception of the extra part for the wrist-mounted beam saber that you see here from Runner A. And then you get into the left arm, more of the same. It's going to be using the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 hands that are going to be articulated with thumb, middle finger, and then the remaining three fingers. Some people aren't the biggest fan of them. I don't think it's that big a deal. They do the job fine. Then you get into building the shoulders, very typical fare, and then you get into the legs here. So the feet look like they're going to be mostly the same as the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0. Some of the new runners for the Amazing Red Warrior are going to be used here, but I think that's mostly sculpt differences. In terms of the actual assembly, it looks very similar to what we've seen before. Then you get into your legs. Yep, that frame is identical to the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, and the armor is layering up in much the same way as those kits. And of course, you have some more information on the Amazing Red Warrior, and you have your color guide here, unfortunately only in Japanese and full color. Then you get the color guide for the pilot figure, and then a lot of what we saw on the sides of the box with the gimmicks and posing and things like that. Then you get into your left leg, which is going to be pretty much identical to your right leg. Then the waist unit, which is again mostly identical to the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, and then you assemble the full Amazing Red Warrior. So now we get into the part that's going to be largely different, which is going to be the backpack and the arsenal. So as you can see, we have this very large kind of protruding backpack here to accommodate the very big, I guess, sub-arms that are going to be going on either side. And then, of course, you get your giant weapons spread with the Hyper Bazooka, the Beam Rifle Otsu, the Beam Rifle Ko, the handgun, whatever it's called, the Beam Gatling, the long beam rifle, and both types of gun blades, short and long. So then you get into your Hyper Bazooka here. Unfortunately, while there is going to be some layering, it does seem like it is going to be largely two halves sandwiched together, so that will probably lead to a fairly nasty seam line running down the middle of the whole weapon. Then you get into the beam pistol, or beam handgun, or whatever it's called, whatever serving as the base for the gun blade, and then you build both of your blades, the short and long type, mount the blade, talking about building the other beam rifles, the Ko, I think, I don't exactly remember which is which, and then talking about holding the beam rifle and how to configure it as either the Beam Rifle Otsu, the long beam rifle, or the Beam Gatling. Then of course talking about being able to mount either of your beam saber effect parts there on the wrist-mounted beam saber, talking about rotating the shoulder vernier units to act as like a jetpack for better thrust, and then talking about articulating the various gimmicks across the torso once you remove the backpack. And then talking about rotating the sub-arms down to actually use the weapons while they're mounted on the backpack, and then talking about the various adapter points to kind of link the weapons together in their midsections. Then of course we get information here about mounting on an action base. We get information on an adapter here to link the two blades together if you want to have like a twin blade thing going on, and then of course you get your decal guide here, which looks like it's not going to be crazy involved, especially compared to the Master Grade Double Zeta, which was the last Master Grade I built last week, but it should still enhance the look of the Amazing Red Warrior a bit. I am a little bit worried about the borders of these stickers because, of course, these are sticker-style decals, this being a standard release. So inside the bags, we will get 18 runners, which is a little more than usual, but that was to be expected given the rather large arsenal of the Amazing Red Warrior here. So of course, besides that, we will be getting this very small color correcting sticker sheet, pretty much containing everything you would expect. Some metallic yellow and black stickers, one for the eye mask here, one for a head camera, and one presumably for one of the beam rifles. And then of course we will be getting this standard sticker style decal sheet, which I am a little worried won't be looking all that great given the slightly darker color scheme of the Amazing Red Warrior, but we will see once the kit is fully assembled. And as for the runners themselves, so these runners were printed in September of 2023, starting with runner PC202 here for our polycap runner from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0. We've seen this runner a few times before. These aren't going to be that big a ideal. I think for a design fairly basic like the Amazing Red Warrior, minus the backpack of course, I think these should do the job all right like they did with most of the other Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 frame kits. So runner A here with a design date of 2015, going to be brand new for the Amazing Red Warrior, going to be coming in 4 different colors. We get white here for a base color for things like the very small shield going on the wrist. We will get the accent parts on the shoulders. We will get a part for the like wrist-mounted beam saber, and then we get our standing and sitting pilot figures here of Meijin Kawaguchi. We get yellow up here for various accent colors across the kit for things like vent details, the Federation cross on the shield, and the collar. We will get a dark red color here, serving as the accent tone of red across the kit for parts like the crotch, the feet, I think the knees, a part for the shield, etc. And then we will get an injection silver here for the gun blades, both the short and long type. We will get 2 of runner B in this primer frame gray for a number of frame parts for all across this kit. This is also new for the Amazing Red Warrior. You see parts for like things like the insides of the feet up here, parts for like the thrusters in the bottom of the feet, a part for the thrusters in the shoulders, parts for where the leg connects into the hip, etc. We're seeing a primer frame gray, still new for the Amazing Red Warrior, for a number of other inner frame parts for things like the head. We have our parts for our hands here. We have the inner parts of the skirts, parts for the torso and hips, etc. We'll get 2 of runner D for many of the armor parts for the limbs across the Amazing Red Warrior, going to be in a lighter tone of gray than the tone seen on runner A. Going to be parts for things like the legs, arms, and shoulders. Runner E1 here, still in that light red, going to be a number of other armor parts here for parts for things like the arms. We have all of our parts for our head here. We have parts for the back and front of the torso. Runner E2 in plain clear, going to be 2 parts, 1 part for our eyes and 1 part for the head camera. Runner F1 going to contain more parts in that slightly darker red tone we saw in runner A, going to be parts for things like the skirts, some accent parts for the torso, etc. Runner F2 here in a primer frame gray, going to contain the inner frame parts for, I believe, the feet. We will also have parts for the backpack here. Runner G from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, going to contain some intermediary frame parts for the feet, the backs of the hands that I don't believe we will be using, and then we have some extra parts here for the Hyper Bazooka, I think. We have like missiles and things that are going to be going on the inside, I believe, of the magazine. Runner H in a gray ABS here, going to be from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, going to contain a number of frame parts. The big one that we're going to be using from this and this kit. Runner I, still in gray ABS from the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0, going to contain a number of different frame parts for things like the arms over here and all of our hand parts and finger parts up here. Runner J, still in gray ABS, going to contain a number of parts, this time for our legs. Many of the frame parts for our legs are going to be on this runner. Runner K, going back to runners new for the Amazing Red Warrior, is going to contain a bunch of weapon parts here, mainly for the Hyper Bazooka. And then runner L is going to contain some more weapon parts here for the beam Gatling, the beam rifle, and the gun blade. And of course, finally, we will be getting runner SB8 here for a set of standard 1/100 beam saber effect parts with a slightly modified base. As you can see, the base for these beam saber effect parts are flat instead of the usual round tip. We will be getting 2 types in short and long in clear yellow. So all of those runners should build up to be a fairly decent kit, like many of the other kits based on the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 frame. So I will see you after the build. All right, welcome back. Here's the Master Grade Gundam Amazing Red Warrior, snap-built, panel-lined, and decaled up with the included sticker-style decals, and this kit actually does look a lot nicer than I was expecting it to. I was expecting it to be a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more generic. It is still a little bit generic looking, but we'll talk about that in the aesthetics section. So, getting right into the build, this is, well, it's a Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 frame-derived build, which is to say it is competently solid. There isn't that much to talk about with regards to the frame because we've seen it a million times before. It assembles up in a pretty satisfying way with extra parts that aren't really necessary for the, I guess, like stability or construction of the build, but are really more there to replicate armor sliding gimmicks in the knees and arms, which do look very good as you articulate the Amazing Red Warrior, and the frame itself holds up fine. Being an ABS and polycap build, it does feel a little bit dated, but given how, I guess, not that over the top the proportions of the Amazing Red Warrior are, it holds fine. The backpack, while large to accommodate the large arsenal the Amazing Red Warrior has, isn't heavy enough to make the polycaps feel like any kind of issue. And the new frame parts the Amazing Red Warrior adds does add articulation in a couple of key points that the Master Grade Arc 72 2.0 simply doesn't have, namely the torso, because the Amazing Red Warrior does not have the same core block gimmick that the Arc 78 2 does, meaning that it does have the ability to have a full ab crunch and things like that, with parts of the inner frame that are new for it, which is nice and does help the frame feel a little bit more modern, because the rest of it definitely feels very dated, but again, it does the job okay. In terms of the additional armor parts, it really does feel like an ARC-78-2 variant. The armor does layer on in a pretty satisfying way, very similar to the Master Grade ARC-78-2 2.0, but doesn't really do anything too crazy on top of it. It really does feel like a variant kit as you're building it, and really only feels like it comes into its own in terms of just the build in the waist and in the arsenal, because the waist is pretty reworked from the Perfect Gundam III, and the arsenal is of course this kit's main unique selling point, so of course that's going to be unique to it. But unfortunately, a lot of the weapons are going to be just two halves sandwiched together, some extra stuff in it, meaning that the majority of the weapons would normally have like a pretty bad ceiling running down the middle, but on most of them I think it's disguised pretty well as just a panel line, so it's not that big a deal that they're two halves sandwiched together. It mostly just has them feel a little bit lower quality than what we would expect from a Master Grade, especially with the Hyper Bazooka, because having built the Hyper Bazooka included with the ARC-72 2.0 and the GM 2.0, that build is significantly nicer than the one we have here, which is literally 4 parts sandwiched together, a part for the handle, a part for the scope, a part for, I think, like the eject port for the ammo or whatever, and a couple of parts to mount it to the backpack. So these weapons do feel a little bit underwhelming in terms of just their construction. In terms of actually using them with the kit, I think they are much better in that regard, but for the build, the Amazing Red Warrior is fairly unremarkable. If you've built anything based on the Master Grade ARC-72 2.0 frame, this is pretty much on par with most of those builds. So getting to aesthetics then, as per usual, I will talk about color accuracy before I get into my opinions on this design. And the Amazing Red Warrior, to probably no one's surprise, is pretty much entirely color accurate. The very tiny color correcting sticker sheet here is very understandable, consisting entirely of metallic details that is normally not color accurate even on modern Master Grades and things like that. So of course sticker 1 is going to be the eye mask here on the Amazing Red Warrior, feeling rather retro with these relatively large eyes compared to the mean glares that we've been seeing with a lot of modern designs, although the glare is still provided by the relatively low brow on the head there. Sticker 2 is going to be this metallic yellow sticker for the rear head camera there, and sticker 3 is going to be this large metallic yellow camera detail on the Hyper Bazooka. So apart from that, this kit is essentially entirely color accurate, which you would expect given the very simple color scheme, with the body consisting of 2 tones of red pretty much entirely. There are a couple of small yellow accents and white accents, but effectively this kit is entirely red, consisting of the primary like bold tone of red that we would see as part of the Gundam color scheme, and a darker tone of red that we would normally associate as the accent color for things like Char's Zaku 2, which essentially fits with Meijin Kawaguchi being essentially a Char XP in Build Fighters, if I'm getting that correct. I haven't actually seen the show, but from what I can tell from his color scheme and reading a quick like spark notes of the plot, he is pretty much the Char clone of that series, and this color scheme kind of fits that. There is one detail that may or may not be color accurate, and that is going to be on the camera here for the beam rifle /long beam rifle. So there's a camera detail here, but it's just in the same gray as the rest of the unit, and that didn't really feel all that right to me, so I did paint it in using EX White Gold, which I think turned out all right, but I'm not exactly sure if that's color accurate or not. All the promo material and the painted builds and things like that don't really show the camera detail, so I can't really tell. The other main, I guess, aesthetic gripe that I have is going to be in the injection silver parts. So because of how the injection silver parts are, all of the nub marks leave some really nasty black nubs on the silver, which I'll show you right now via a picture, but it looks really bad and no amount of sanding will ever get rid of it, so your only recourse is pretty much to repaint the entire thing. I just used a standard silver Gundam marker and it turned out all right. I do think it looks a lot better than the injection silver that they went with on this kit normally, but yeah, for both gunblade types, the long type here and the short type on the kit, you're really going to need to paint that blade in metallic silver if those black nub marks are going to be bothering you. So getting into my opinions on this design, I do think it's kind of generic, and I mean that in a good way, in that this is pretty much the Perfect Gundam Red Warrior that has some slight modification to it. So if you're not the biggest fan of Build Fighters, you can just kind of treat this as a slightly modified Red Warrior, because that's exactly what it is. The only real differences between the Red Warrior and this kit, there are only 3 main differences that I noticed, which is one, of course, the second arm on the backpack to accommodate the second weapon being mounted to it. The Red Warrior only has the Hyper Bazooka mounted to it. All of the skirt armor on the Amazing Red Warrior is reworked. The skirt armor on the standard Red Warrior is much simpler than what we have here on display, and the ankle ankle armor is reworked. So while the Red Warrior has very typical the Gundam like bracket on it, this has this armor block here that can shift around on 2 piston details there. So apart from that, this is essentially just the Red Warrior. So that is a pretty interesting thing with this kit, that it is essentially the only master grade Red Warrior that we have, and that we probably are going to get, because it's an obscure enough design that I don't think we're ever going to get it. We might get it as like a P Bandai variant for this kit, but who knows. And I do feel like this kit, like funnily enough, does actually work as a really great base for custom builds if you don't like the color scheme or things, or the loadout or things like that, because the color scheme is simple enough that like you can pretty much replace it with anything else and it would look pretty good. I think this kit is generic Gundam enough and versatile enough that you can actually have it in pretty much any different like color scheme and have it also look good. And I think the classic proportions of this kit being very, again, ARC-78-2 coated with the thin athletic legs and blocky upper body also do lend to that idea very well. It's a very versatile kit that you can also replace the loadout of. It can look very good in like things like melee poses and things like that, or very good in ranged all-out like heavy artillery poses. Like the Lightning Black Warrior is a variant of the Amazing Red Warrior that's very like artillery and like ranged weapons focused. I do have the high grade that might backlog, so make sure to submit notification bell so you don't miss that review when that comes out. But on this kit, because of the way everything mounts into the backpack with just being a peg that slots into it, it should be fairly easy to replace the loadout of this kit. If you just like drill a hole into other weapons that you would want this kit to wield, you can essentially just replace its arsenal, which again makes it pretty good for customs. This thing isn't specialized enough that that's kind of pigeonholed into having a specific niche, so you can have this kit have essentially any arsenal and still look good. So I do think this kit is, fittingly enough for being a build fighters kit, actually a really good base for custom builds, which I do think helps set it apart from a lot of other master grades, because apart from that, this is a fairly generic, I guess, design. The other thing I want to comment on is going to be the decals. So what I find a little bit frustrating is some of the decals they very clearly put like extra work into to make not look that intrusive. For example, SK for Shiro Kyoda, the guy who made the original Perfect Gundam in the Plamo Kyoshiro manga from the 80s. Those decals are all over this kit, and the borders cut around the SK, as you can see, are very tight to the decal themselves, which actually ends up looking pretty fine on the Gundam itself. Things like this stripe are also cut pretty close to the edge of the decal itself, so that looks good. These details here that go on all of the weapons also look good. Things like these details here on the shoulders and skirts that follow the contour of the actual like geometry that it's going on also does look all right. But then you have details like these on these like thrusters here above the shoulder, which don't follow the contour at all and look pretty awful. Things like small text, like you see here on top of the center area of the torso, has a relatively large border compared to the decal on it. So while some of the decals are very clearly like okay, and they've had more work into them to make them look all right on this relatively darker color scheme, other decals are still very typically like master grade sticker style decal where the borders are extremely apparent, like you see here on the skirts. So your mileage may vary. Some of these decals look okay, like the SK and the decals going like following the contours of the shoulders and skirts. Those you can put on with no issue. The decals of like small like marking text and warnings and things like that, if you want to put them on, I would just opt for water slides. So for a quick size comparison, here is the master grade Amazing Red Warrior next to a standard sized high grade being the high grade Blue Destiny Unit 1, and a standard sized master grade being the master grade Jib Sniper 2 White Dingo team. So as you can see here, the Amazing Red Warrior being based on the master grade ARC-78-2 2.0 frame, and the Perfect Gundam III in universe is essentially a standard height Gundam. It is a like hair taller head height than the Jib Sniper 2 there, but I'll chalk that up to slight proportional differences in the actual model kit. This kit will take up pretty much average master grade space on your shelf. It may take up more like width-wise space or length-wise space depending on the size of the melee weapon you're going to use. We'll talk about that in a moment. Or if you're going to have it in like a widespread stance, like firing both of its long ranged options on the backpack in 2 different directions. But in general, this will take up about average master grade space on your shelf. So for your accessories, here is the Gundam Amazing Red Warrior with everything it comes with. So this is going to be the main reason why you would want to pick up this kit, apart from getting essentially a Perfect Gundam 3 Red Warrior in the box with some slight modifications, is going to be the wide arsenal the Amazing Red Warrior comes with. So as per usual, starting with our hand options, these are going to be the Master Grade ARC-72 2.0 fully articulated hands. or almost fully articulated hands. It's going to be split into thumb, index finger, and remaining 3 fingers that are all going to be on ball joints. Every non-thumb finger is going to have a second joint in the middle. The thumb only has 1 point of articulation at the base, and the tab in the hand isn't just a molded tab sticking out of the hand. It is a separate part that can fold in and out. That was a slight issue with the build, but it's present with pretty much every other kit using the Master Grade ARC 78-2 2.0 frame, where the tab that goes into the hand is very small and fragile, so be careful when you handle it because it is a very big break risk. In terms of your adapters then, you will of course be getting this action base adapter to have the Amazing Red Warrior flying around in the air, and then you will get all of these other adapters, most of which do the same thing. So all of these adapters here are for mounting your weapons onto the side skirts. The side skirt armor can slide down to reveal a hard point to mount these adapters to hold the weapons, which you'll see in the articulation section. So you can use these, what looks like action-based adapters, to just hold on to the grips of things like the handle for the gun blade or the handle of the beam gatling or things like that. And then these 2 double peg adapters here can lock 2 weapons together by the points to mount onto the backpack. So if you want, say, the beam rifle Otsu and the Gatling kind of pinned together on the side skirt instead of mounted on the back because you want to have the gun blade on the back, you can do that as well. And you get a ton of adapters to do that on both sides of the skirt, no matter what configuration you want. And then you will get these 2 adapters here. You can really only use 1 in this kit because these are going to be for just having the blades of the gun blade together on this adapter, so you can have your Amazing Red Warrior wielding essentially a twin blade, which you will be seeing in the posing section. So that's an interesting thing they included. I was not expecting that. For your beam saber then, of course, your beam saber is going to be mounted into the right wrist, and while you get 4 beam saber effects, because beam saber effects come in pairs in the box, you can only use 1 at a time. You only have essentially 2 effects you can use 1 at a time. You can either use the short style effect here or the standard long style effect here. I think in lore, the Amazing Red Warrior pretty much only uses the short style effect, so that's what I'm going to be posing with in the posing section. You won't be seeing the long style effect because, well, it's a pretty bog standard beam saber effect part, just being in a slightly different color, so we've seen it a million times before. We'll also be getting this standing pilot figure of Meijin Kawaguchi here. Again, it's nice to see it, seeing that in some certain like modern master grades with things like the Master Grade Eclipse, they're just issuing the standing pilot figure in general, which is a shame because I do like having it just next to the kit as a like sign of scale. So for the rest of the arsenal of the Amazing Red Warrior, it consists of a pretty, like, I guess, modular setup that you can mount onto the left arm on the backpack there. The right arm is pretty much essentially always going to be taken up by the Hyper Bazooka at all times. You can remove it and replace it with something else, but in lore, it's always supposed to have the Hyper Bazooka on the right shoulder. So in the left shoulder right now, I do have the gun blade here, which, of course, the blade is removable. You can swap the short type effect out for the long type effect if you want. The effects also have a tab here in the handle, so the Amazing Red Warrior can just hold on to them like swords, which is pretty cool. So you'll see it dual wielding these in the posing section. So yeah, apart from that, not really much to say about the gun blade in general. It is pretty much just a handle with a sword on it. You can either have the short type or the long type on it. One thing to note is that if you want to have it with the long type on the backpack, this long type is so long that like if you attach it to the mounting point, like if I just hold it where the mounting point is, you can see it like drags on the ground. So you will have to elevate the arm if you want to have the long type gun blade on the backpack. So then you get all your parts to configure the like big rifles, either the long rifle or the beam Gatling. So of course, you will have the beam rifle Otsu here, which you can just wield on its own as a separate weapon, which I don't think looks very interesting, mainly because of the lack of, I guess, like a definitive stock, because it's pretty hollow there, which doesn't look all that great. And this looks like a pretty awkward weapon in general, but this also serves as the back of either the long rifle or the long type beam Gatling. So for instance, if you take this beam Gatling here, you can just slide the weapon like so, and then you have your long type beam Gatling, which looks pretty impressive on the backpack. Just here in my hand, it looks a little bit awkward, but of course this beam Gatling can be swapped out for the parts for the beam rifle Co. So you can just remove the magazine there and the barrel for the beam Gatling, and then replace it with this part here for the barrel of the beam rifle Otsu, and then the sensor detail here. So you have your beam rifle Co. I was calling it the Otsu. I get the two mixed up. So of course you want to combine with your beam rifle Otsu. You then get the long beam rifle that you could just have the Amazing Red Warrior firing. So the one thing I do want to note with the beam rifle Co. here is that there is a bit of a fit issue. There's a bit of play here in the barrel. Yeah, you can definitely see that, where this part going into the center section doesn't really fit all that well. There is supposed to be this gap here, I think, looking at the like painted builds and promo material and things like that, but for some reason it just doesn't fit quite right and has this kind of wiggle. In addition, you also get this part here. So if you want to have this like missile pod on your beam rifle co, which does feel a little bit redundant with the hyper bazooka that's going to be on the Amazing Red Warrior at all times. So you can just slot that part in, and then you can mount it back where the barrel mounted before. Unfortunately, as you saw there, the extra weight of this missile pod here does mean that it droops much more easily. So yeah, while I think it looks all right, well, it would look all right if the barrel would hold straight, it doesn't hold straight, so it does look pretty awful. So you won't be seeing this missile pod in the posing section, unfortunately. That is just a weird fit issue I noticed, so you can let me know in the comments if that's a common part of like just this kit and this weapon in general, or if this is just an issue specifically with my like batch or whatever. But there is a pretty nasty fit issue in this rifle here. So yeah, the Amazing Red Warrior here has a pretty complete suite of accessories and weapons, which should give you plenty of freedom in posing, which you'll definitely see in the posing section. So getting into articulation now. So this is going to be pretty familiar to anyone who's handled the Master Grade ARC 78 II 2.0 frame, which is to say it is pretty solid across the board. But of course, for those of you who haven't, starting with, as usual, with the head, you can get a pretty decent upward look there from the head. For a downward look, it can look down into its own chest. You get some pretty solid side to side tilt, and of course you can fully 360 it about the ball joint. Just be careful you don't snap the antennas as per usual. In the shoulders then, this entire shoulder assembly will swing out to enable a nearly 90-degree shoulder swing, quite nice. The thruster units here can swivel back if you want to show the Amazing Red Warrior kind of blasting forward, and they can also tilt up if you want them on the sides looking a little bit more dynamic, but moving them out of the way will facilitate about a 135-degree bend before the arm will want to pop off of the socket. You of course get full rotation in the upper bicep, just again be careful you don't pop it out of the socket, which does tend to happen fairly easily. A full double bend in the elbow will give you essentially a 180-degree bend, also revealing this nice armor cap here in the elbow for some separation. One thing to note is unfortunately the gaps for mounting what would normally be the typical Gundam shield onto the forearms are still here, even though the shield only mounts on one side and is on the side instead of the back. So that is a little bit unsightly, and you may want to cover that up with plow plate if it bothers you. And this tiny shield here is going to be on a ball joint. I think it looks a little bit ridiculous, but it's small enough to essentially act as just extra forearm armor, so I'm not that annoyed by it like I am with like something like the Destiny's tiny shield. But yeah, that is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. Like I mentioned earlier, the fingers are going to separate into thumb, index, rest of the fingers, with 2 points of articulation for every finger besides the thumb. The thumb will have 1 point of articulation. The rest is on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things, in addition to a hinge, which will allow for a 90-degree, like, I guess, flex to either outside or inside. In terms of the torso then, like I mentioned earlier, because this does not have the core block system modeled in it, it does have a fully functioning ab crunch, which is pretty all right. The thickness of the torso armor does mean that it does collide with the crotch fairly early, but you do have some ab crunch, and you do get some pretty nice ab crunch backwards, which isn't that big of an issue in this kit because of the relative lightness of the backpack compared to how it looks. You get some okay side to side crunch, and unfortunately you can't 360 it because, again, of the thickness of this crotch armor. So effectively, you are limited to maybe a 30-degree spin to either side. There are 2 auxiliary gimmicks in the torso here. For the cockpit hatch, this will slide up. There's a little door here to reveal your sitting pilot figure of Meijin Kawaguchi. You can really only see his feet, but he is in there. And then for the missile pods in the chest, there's going to be a little tab in the backpack. If I move the arm of the backpack out of the way, you can see there's a little tab back there. So it is pretty recessed. So again, if I take my hobby knife and use it to push the tab out. See, once the tab is out, it does reveal the 3-tube missile pod in the chest there, which you will see in the posing section, which is pretty interesting. I thought these weren't going to be color accurate because they're just gray on the runner, but apparently they're supposed to be in gray. But because of how recessed these doors are, once the thing is recessed, it is a little bit hard to get back down without tweezers or a hobby knife or something. In the backpack then, of course, these sub-arms will have multiple points of articulation, one at the base, one in the middle, and another one out here where the weapon is, allowing for pretty much a full degree of rotation, allowing you to get the weapon any which way you would ever want it. So yeah, that does look pretty good in firing poses with the Hyper Bazooka and the Long Rifle or Beam Gatling, so you will see that in the posing section. In addition, these thrusters here are going to be on ball joints, which will do ball joint things, so you can have the thrusters like kind of straight out back to show it's charging forward, or you can have it down to show like a resting or rising motion. In the waist then, there is no hip drop or hip swing mechanism. The front skirts will go up about like maybe 75 degrees. It's almost 90 degrees. And the front skirts can slide down to reveal more missiles hidden within. The side skirt armor can slide down to reveal the hard points I was mentioning earlier for mounting the weapons on the side skirts. and can flip up over 90 degrees. Back skirts don't have any sliding gimmicks, but can rotate a little bit before they want to pop off the ball joint, given the relative thickness of the torso there. You can get them up about 45 degrees. In terms of your kicks then, you can get about a 90-degree kick forward, a little more than 90 degrees to the side, and about 60 degrees backwards. You will get some rotation in the upper thigh. You can pretty much 180 it, but this back part will want to collide with the center of the waist there. A full double bend in the knee will allow for a 180-degree bend. Just be careful you don't pop it off the socket like I just did. That 180-degree bend will also reveal a slight arm separation gimmick where the center of the kneecap here stays still while the remaining parts continue to move, also revealing things like this really nice piston detail on the top and the bottom there. The ankle armor can like rotate and swivel and things like that on these two really nice piston joints, so they will move as the foot moves. For your feet then, there is some heel-toe separation, allowing for a toe dip and independent toe raise, like so. So for overall toe dips, it is actually relatively minor. You are relying a lot on that toe joint to get a decent dip. For overall raises though, you can get a pretty decent overall raise, but just be careful though, because these little piston details do tend to pop out fairly easily. You get a 45-degree tilt to either side. Well, while you can't 360 the foot, they will pop the piston details here in the ankle out of the socket. So realistically, you can't really rotate the foot all that much. So yeah, overall, the articulation for the Amazing Red Warrior is very good, as you would expect from the ARC 72 2.0 frame, with several key additions, like extra articulation in the skirts to show the missile gimmicks, and extra articulation in the torso where there normally isn't any because of the core block gimmick. So let's see the articulation in action in some poses. So getting the Master Grade Gundam Amazing Red Warrior into a spin, starting with the usual running and gunning pose. Here it is with the long rifle split in two, wielding the beam rifle Ko in the right hand and the beam rifle Otsu in the left hand. So this shows off a couple of things. One, while the Amazing Red Warrior does look good in motion and can hold this pose very well due to the very stable nature of the Master Grade ARC 72 2.0 frame, it doesn't look the greatest in this kind of pose. I think if you're going to have it in motion, you want it in motion in the air, where it does look quite good in forward charging poses due to the ability to kind of repose the verniers on the shoulders backwards, instead of a pose like this where the movement of the shoulder kind of forces it forward. I could have moved it backwards beforehand, I just didn't think of it at the time, so my bad. This pose could look a little bit better, but as it is now, I wouldn't really consider doing this on the shelf. This is a kit that you definitely want either if you have it on the ground in a wide-legged all-out firing stance or a preparing stance. Otherwise, this kit really does look its best in the air with its over-the-top weapons and arsenal and posing options. And besides that, I think the long rifle looks pretty terrible split up into the beam rifle Ko and Otsu. I think the options for the short beam rifle, either having it as the beam rifle Ko or as the beam Gatling, look pretty terrible wielded in like its handheld one-handed form like this. It should definitely be combined with the beam rifle Otsu and pretty much exclusively wielded on the subarm. I think split up like this, it looks really awkward and odd, and the proportions of the beam rifle Otsu in particular look very strange to me. I don't know what it is. It just feels like a kind of incomplete, like GN rifle or something. It's just, something's just not quite right with it for me. It might be the hollow space in the back of it, but because of how awkward the weapons look in the hands, in addition to the slight awkwardness of this pose in general, despite the Amazing Red Warrior's ability to pull it off very easily, this isn't really something I would consider having this kit doing on the shelf. Getting the Amazing Red Warrior into a crouch, here it is going all out, firing off its entire arsenal, or at least as much as it can realistically fire at once, with the Hyper Bazooka in the right hand, the beam Gatling in the left hand, and the missile hatches in the chest and front skirts open, all going full bore. So this is a pretty, actually surprisingly alright pose. I was really expecting going into this to really want the Amazing Red Warrior kind of in motion at all times to emphasize the, I guess, athleticism of the general silhouette of the ARC 78-2 that it's pretty much rocking. I know the Perfect Gundam 3 is very different, but in terms of the actual silhouette of this kit, it's very slender ARC 78-2-like. But the idea of this pose is pretty excellent for this kit, going all out with both of the subarms showing off all of its heavy weaponry, which is again the main draw of this kit. It's insane arsenal. So I do think this pose could work really well in a wide-legged grounded pose, which is how I have it on my shelf currently, or charging forward in the air, which also works and they show it off in the promo material and things like that. Crouching like this is also an okay option. I can see this working alright in a diorama or something if you pose it with something like the Build Strike Full package or the Build Gundam Mark II or something like that, kind of in the air dodging its strikes as it's on the ground going all out like this. But what this also brings up is a bit of an issue with actually getting the hands to grip onto the weapons on the subarms, which for as good as I think this pose looks, it takes a lot of effort to get it that way. Now I think this might just be an issue with my kit, but the peg going from the left shoulder into the left upper bicep was very loose and the arm kept falling off, and the hands just had a really hard time gripping onto the weapon in the way that weapon wanted to sit when the subarm was extended. So it took a surprisingly long time. It was very awkward to get it into this pose, but I think the end result is well worth it. So just know that if you decide to get this kit, I don't know if it's an issue with the batch that I got specifically, or if it's an issue with the design overall, but posing the kit wielding the weapons on the subarms was a very annoying thing to do. So getting the kit into the air, here it is slashing with the short type gun blade downward at a target with the beam rifle and the offhand kind of flung behind it. And I do think that this is a alright pose. Unfortunately, I think I jumped the gun a bit on being excited and having torso articulation on an ARC-78-2 master grade frame, because this kit doesn't look the greatest in these kinds of melee poses. I don't know exactly what it is. I think it may be the lack of ability to fully rotate the torso. While the ab crunch does help sell the motion of a melee strike, the inability to rotate the torso with the swing really hinders it. So I think this pose could look good if the torso had the ability to rotate a little bit more. In practice, it's not all that great. So I don't know how much you can actually modify the crotch armor, things like that, to actually enable the torso to like rotate properly to make this pose look more natural. But as it is now out of the box without any kind of modification, it is pretty unnatural as far as melee poses look. It looks a little bit stiff, and it doesn't look like the Amazing Red Warrior is putting as much force as it could into the strike. So I think it's a little bit awkward. And if you want to pose this kit with the gun blade, you should definitely do it in a preparing pose, a readying pose, or have the melee option in the offhand as it fires a ranged weapon, like you'll see later in the conclusion section. So overall, while I think the kit does look really good in the air and it has the potential to look quite good in a melee strike, I think as it is now, it's not really something I would consider having this kit do on the shelf. So here it is in a pose from the promo material, where it's either leaping backwards or descending from a leap, firing the shield Vulcan out in one direction and having the short beam saber out in the other. So I'm pretty much just going to leave this up while I talk about the conclusion, because this is just to show off the short style beam saber effect part with the wrist-mounted beam saber, because I don't really think there's that much to say. It's very similar to the beam tonfa in terms of concept, so if you like that weapon, you'll like this. If you don't like that weapon, you won't like this, and you shouldn't really feel obligated to have to use it, because I think there are plenty of interesting options for the Amazing Red Warrior's arsenal that don't involve the wrist-mounted beam saber. So, in conclusion, the Master Grade Amazing Red Warrior is a very versatile kit that actually serves as a surprisingly good base if you want to do custom builds and things like that. It being kind of a generic design, and I mean that in a good way, does mean it is a pretty excellent base platform to let your imagination kind of run wild and be able to change its arsenal out with some slight modification to like any weapon you would want to give it, or change its color scheme, because I think this geometric design is generic enough that it could look good in a wide variety of different color schemes, and it has enough versatility in terms of its like sculpt and things like that for posing that I think you can pull off like many different kinds of variants of this kit, whether close quarters, although you are a bit limited in that regard, or long range, like we even see in universe with things like the Lightning Black Warrior. But the build for this kit is very typical of other kits that use the Master Grade ARC-78-2 2.0 frame, which is to say it is adequate. The frame feels very dated, being ABS and polycaps, but it does do the job of holding up the kit quite well. Any issues I had with posing had nothing to do with the polycaps or the frame. A lot of it was to do with the overall proportions of the kit in general. The only real issue that the frame poses is with the hands. Having the tab not actually be molded into the hand itself and having it be a separate part that you need to fold out, or does end up feeling very awkward when you actually try to get the Amazing Red Warrior to hold onto the weapons on these subarms. It's just very awkward and off. It doesn't really work in a lot of cases. In terms of aesthetics, the Amazing Red Warrior is essentially perfectly color accurate, with the one detail needing to be painted in being the sensor detail on the beam rifle /long beam rifle needing to be in a metallic yellow. Again, I used EX white gold. I think it turned out alright, but it's not the biggest deal in the world for that one detail to need to be painted in. What is a slightly bigger deal, especially if you want to have this kit wielding its gun blade, either the short type or the long type, is the injection silver that they use for it is really kind of gross looking. After you snip it with the nubs and everything, you can't really sand it down because it leaves a really ugly black mark there no matter what you do. So your only real recourse is to paint it over, or just kind of ignore the big black nub mark on your blade. And while it's not the biggest deal in the world, it is a little bit of an annoyance that you don't really expect to see with a modern Master Grade, but it's just something to keep in mind. Again, not the biggest deal in the world that you have to repaint the blade to get rid of those black nub marks, but apart from that, aesthetically, the Amazing Red Warrior is essentially perfect, and like I mentioned earlier, it is oddly generic in a way that makes it pretty much perfect for custom builds, which is something that I don't really see in a lot of kits. Normally you look at a kit, sometimes your imagination might run wild, but in a lot of cases, at least for me, it's just about recreating its appearance from like whatever property it's from in terms of color accuracy and things like that. With the Amazing Red Warrior, I think it is generic enough that it can very easily be made into various different customs, even by just like stealing a couple of weapons from another kit, drilling a hole in it, and then mounting it on the backpack to enable this kit to use them. So I do think that this kit does excel in that regard, which is pretty thematically on point for a build fighter's master grade, and not something a lot of other master grades can really say. In terms of accessories then, this is where this kit really shines, and this is where the vast majority of the value comes from in this kit. The sheer versatility of its arsenal is not to be underestimated. It comes with pretty much every weapon for every situation you could ever want, and it is actually impossible to display it with all of its accessories. You will have to have a bunch in the box in your closet or whatever after you finish posing your kit and putting it on the shelf, so this kit is also ripe for reposing possibilities if you want to swap its arsenal out every few months or something to spice up its look on the shelf or whatever. But this kit comes with essentially everything you could want. It comes with, of course, with the Hybrid Bazooka on the right subarm. It comes with various options for the left subarm, whether you want the short beam rifle, the beam rifle Ko, the beam rifle Otsu, the long beam rifle, the beam Gatling, the optional missile pod on the beam rifle Ko, the gun blade with 2 different blade options, the adapter to enable you to use the blade like in a twin blade style, the ability to grip onto the tang of the blade itself and use it as a grip, the effects for the wrist-mounted beam saber. All of that really does give you a ton of versatility and different ways you can pose this kit on your shelf, which is again its greatest kind of positive in my opinion. In terms of articulation then, this is where this kit is let down a tiny bit in the torso. Even though it does actually have a proper amount of ab crunch both forward, backward, and to the side, it is let down severely by the lack of rotation. With such an impressive melee option as the long type gunblade, the inability to actually rotate the torso to convey the power behind the strike with the mobile suit like twisting its torso along with it really does hamper any kind of, I guess, believability or weight behind the melee strikes that it can do. So with its melee option, it's best off in a preparing pose rather than an actual striking pose. But apart from that, this kit has enough articulation to pull off pretty much anything you could ever want. Your options really only being hampered by the poor ability of the hands to grip onto the subarms naturally, or the weapons on the subarms naturally. So you are a little bit limited in the angles that you have aiming those weapons, but if you have a little bit of patience and work with the kit enough, you can get a bunch of poses that do look quite good with it. And because it's such an all-rounder mobile suit, it's not really pigeonholed into any specific, I guess, purpose in terms of its action poses, so it can do most poses fairly competently, again, besides some believable mid-strike melee poses. So would I recommend this kit? Honestly, unless you hate this design, absolutely. This kit has something for everyone to love. Whether it's the insane amount of accessories, providing a very wide variety of posing options on your shelf, and the ability to repose this kit every few months without it feeling stale. Whether it's the kit providing a fairly neutral and excellent base for custom builds if you're really into that. And this kit could serve as a fairly decent, I guess, entry into making custom builds, even if it's just swapping out the arsenal with weapons stolen from another master grade kit that you drill holes into. Whether it's the fairly enjoyable build if you've never built a master grade ARC 78-2 2.0 frame-based kit before, this kit is a fairly decent introduction to that. This kit really does everything all right, with a couple of down points, such as the nub marks on the injection silver parts on the blade, the lack of torso rotation failing to sell the weight of a melee strikes mid-action, or whether it's the annoying master grade ARC 72 2.0 hands that make gripping onto the weapons on the subarms a bit of a chore. I think those downsides are not enough to negate the wide variety of upsides of this kit. This kit really feels like a jack of all trades of gunpla in the best way possible, so I do think this is a pretty valuable addition to your collection if you've never had this kit before, especially with it feeling a little bit fresh with the lack of build fighters kits in the master grade line in general. So that was my review of the master grade Gundam Amazing Red Warrior. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub the notification bell so you don't miss any future reviews. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the high grade Leo N. I'll see you then.